Okay, I suggest that we start because we have a sharp 1 hour program. Welcome to everyone to this new session of the networking channel. You might know that we have been on pause during the holiday season, but we are very delighted to restart today with a very nice program where we are going to talk about the matrix. But in a minute, I would like just to recall you a few points about the networking channel. First and foremost, this is your channel. So this is a community channel, and we are addressing all topics that we believe are of interest for our community, ranging from, of course, research, education, which is also very hotly debated here, as well as industry, innovation, and societal development goals, implication to society at large. And the program is very simple. You just have to push the button every second Wednesday. It's always at the same time. It's for an hour. And the program, of course, is recorded. So it's also available offline on our YouTube channel. And the slides are also available on the website. And there is a Slack channel that is available in case you would like to ask questions after the program ended to the panelists. The networking channel started long ago, as you can see, just as a reaction to the very sad situation of the COVID pandemic, where we believe that we needed a place where the community can meet and discuss and exchange on broad topics from, again, education involving students to research and industry. So you can see here all the programs we have been addressing so far, and all of those, of course, are available online. Today, we are delighted that we are going to address a different topic. As I said, it's about the matrix, and unfortunately, I will say it's very timely when you look at the situation of the world as it evolves. And I'm very pleased that we could start this new session of the networking program, the networking channel, with this program. So without a minute, I will hand over to Kavé Salamatian. He's a professor at the Université de Savoie in France, but he's also the European chair of Maritime cybersecurity at TalTech in Estonia, and he accepted very gently to chair this session. Kavé, I will give the floor to you now.
Thank you very much, Serge. Thank you very much all for participating. Today, we are going to talk about an issue or one problem that has been, for some of us, obvious, but was not clearly identified up to a recent period of time, which is that what we are doing as network professional, doing technical stuff, doing computer science, developing routing algorithm, developing, data centers network or everything, has also a strategic, political, and geopolitical implication. And we are not just doing a technical work in our corner without having larger implications. This might seem obvious now because everybody knows that cybersecurity risks are international. Everybody knows that network has a long reach, but it has been something that the different community working on this topic has been up to very recently very much separated. On one hand, the technical people were doing their technical stuff without taking care of the political or geopolitical implication of what they do. On another side, the geopolitician, the political scientists were doing their thing without knowing enough of the technical depths of the issues that they were talking about. And this presentation that we have today is really about trying to fill this gap trying to show this synergy that might be needed between different community of scholarship, geopolitics, networking, sociology, computer science, security studies, networking, and so on and so forth, in order to have a kind of holistic view on this strategic and geopolitical implication of network, and to be able to understand this dimension of the digital revolution. So I'm quite delighted today that I am accompanied in this presentation by two very good and very nice researchers that are in fact showing across the spectrum that I was just saying, the interest of the topic. On one hand, we have the pleasure of having Paul Barford, that is professor of computer science at the University of Madison. He has been active for a long time on internet measurement, cybersecurity related to networking protocols, and I had the pleasure of being with him and working with him for a long time. And on the other hand, I have Kavé Limonier, that is an associate professor in geopolitics in France, working in the French Institute of Geopolitics. He is a specialist of the Russian cyber dimension. He had written a very nice and very interesting book about the emergence of internet and computer in Russia, in the former Soviet Union. And he has been working also on these multidisciplinary areas with me on these topics. So we have two very good panelists, and I will also on my side add some elements about the topic globally. So let's begin with Kevin, that will give the view from the geopolitical side. I will continue with Paul, and I will continue after that with my comment, and we will go around for the discussion between ourselves and also the discussion with the participants. So let's move to Kevin.
Well, okay. Hello, everybody. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
You hear me? Okay, great. So I can start. So thank you very much for the invitation. As Kavé said, the implication, the intrications between geopolitics and network analysis and computer science are very are quite new, actually, and I would like here to talk about my experience as a social scientist, because I'm a geographer, so my job is to explore and to understand the world in its physical processes and human processes. I'd like here to share a little bit about my experience about working on internet routes from the perspective of a social scientist and of a geographer. So just to start, just maybe one definition, one small methodological definition of what I am talking about when I'm talking about geopolitics. So basically, geopolitics, as I call it, is a subfield of geography. So it is a part of a bigger discipline, which is geography. The aim of geopolitics is to study territory and territorialization. That is to say, territorial disputes, strategies of control over physical space, etc., etc. What we say in geopolitics is that territory is the product of control processes over geographical space. So there are a lot of geographers who worked on it, but they basically are based on the work of two very famous French philosophers, such as Gilles Deleuze and Michel Foucault, for whom power is a matter of network. So when you control space, geographical space, when you control territory, actually you control networks. And these networks can be physical, of course, roads, railroads, etc., social, a group of people, a social network, discursive, that is to say how an information, a data will go through these kind of networks, and they also can be symbolical, that is to say to whom you pay allegiance, etc. And controlling all these networks embeds what we call territorial control, and the dispute, the war of our territory is a war of controlling networks, as we can see now, for example, in Ukraine. And internet embeds all these types of networks, physical, social, symbolical, etc. So basically that was why personally, I was very interested in studying internet routes and basically, and especially regarding the border gateway protocols and the links that exist between all these sub-networks that form the internet, such as autonomous systems. So I have met Kavé a long time ago now, and he's really the guy who made me discover the geopolitical dimension of something that was for me very technical. I mean, I've always been interested in computer science and all these kind of things, but I'm basically a geographer specialized on Russia. And I conducted some tests during my PhD about conducting some trace routes, for example, from a point A to a point B of Russia, for example, to understand how a packet of data can circulate on a network. And for me, a trace route when I was a PhD student was a kind of invitation to travel. There was a kind of poetry in it, but it was not enough to work on the methodology. And I used Kavé's data. We used Kavé's data to produce the first, I would say, geopolitical maps of cyberspace that we did. For example, here what you have is a representation of all the autonomous systems that we have managed to detect, and the
Kevin,
yeah.
Kevin, your slide, or you are not moving the slides.
Really?
Yes.
And here?
Yes, here you are moving it. Yes.
Okay, so when I go to full screen, it doesn't work.
Doesn't show. So
okay, so this was my first slide. What is geopolitics? And now is the second slide about how internet at the BGP level has a geopolitical shape, as you can see here, because there is a consistency of autonomous systems regarding the country they declare they are installed in. And you can see here, for example, the Russian and Ukrainian network, which are very close. That was a first step, very interesting step that allowed me to go a little bit further with my team about how internet routes are basically used to control digital networks. And this is especially the case in Russia, my country of specialty, because as you may know, for 10 years and more, Russia has implemented a policy of digital sovereignty and sovereign internet, суверенный интернет in Russian, which is now at the core of all the policy of the Russian government in order to control what goes in and what goes out from the country. And it is a fascinating topic because it raises the question of digital borders. It raises the question of how a state, a nation state, a government can implement actual borders. I mean, actual borders that filtrate a network or something, which is, in fact, for us in geography, is a continuation of what we know in the physical space, but into the cyberspace. But for the moment, I have to say that the Russian strategy is still in the limbs, because the Russian network is one of the most complex in the world, and they are struggling with their own network complexity. There are 13,000 ISPs in Russia. There are huge problems to implement what the Russian law requires. But if they manage one day to do that, well, it will be a huge step to a split, I would say, of the internet. So there is a politicization of internet protocols, as we can see, because the Russian government actually wants to act at the BGP level. That's the level they chose to filtrate, to control, to centralize the network. Another example of intrications between geopolitics and network analysis is what is happening in Ukraine since 2014, because as you may know, the war we are experiencing now in Eastern Europe is just a continuation of a conflict that started 6 years ago when the pro-Russian Ukrainian government was overthrown by the Ukrainian people. And since 2014 and the annexation of Crimea and the de facto annexation of Eastern Ukraine, Donbass, the DNR and LNR, that is to say the two separatist entities in Eastern Ukraine controlled by the Russians, we have witnessed some digital maneuvers in order to disconnect Crimea and Donbass from the Ukrainian main network and to reconnect it to the Russian network. This is something we have witnessed for a long time ago, and as you can see on the right part of my slide, in 2014, before the creation of a first cable between Crimea and Russia, I mean, the Crimean network, at least the ASs, were completely implemented into the Ukrainian network. But from November 2014, we can see slowly this Crimean network being swallowed by the Russian networks. Of course, here it is a result of the algorithm we chose, but this algorithm, Force Atlas 2, is quite good to represent clusters and to make analysis in social science. And we can see in November 2018, the same thing is happening for Donbass. And what is even more interesting is the fact that it is not it is something that has been planned, because in Crimea, the disconnection of the Crimean network from the Ukrainian network has been made under the supervision of one or two operators that are very close to the FSB, as we know it now. And in the Donbass, it's the same. 2 or 3 operators run by people who are former Russian officers or these kind of things are the core keys of how the Donbass was connected to the rest of the world. And since the beginning of the war, and well, since the beginning of the invasion, sorry, in last February, we know that every territory that has been occupied by the Russians, almost every territory has been disconnected from Ukrainian ASs and reconnected to Russian ASs. But since February, Russia has blocked a huge amount of foreign websites, media, free resources, etc., so that when you are in Russia now without a VPN, you only access, I would say, the truth that the Kremlin wants you to know. So when you are in an occupied area today, there is a chance that your ISP has been reconnected to the Russian network, and so that you are beyond the Russian front lines and beyond the Russian digital borders. And so you are in the Kremlin's regime of truth, I would say, because you do not have access to other resources. Of course, you're going to have access if you know how to use VPNs and so on, but that's not the case of everyone. So now these dynamics of disconnection, reconnections means really something about how citizens are interacting each other, because, well, internet now has is something that has a huge importance in our everyday lives, especially in the context of war. And I'm talking for 11 minutes now, so I won't be able to present you the last part of my presentation. I'm sorry, but just a few words about it. We wanted to validate a lot of hypotheses we had regarding internet mapping and internet exploration from a geographical point of view in some regions that we consider that are at the margin of the networks. That is to say, regions that are very far from the economic and political center that embeds the internet. So, for example, Central Asia. So we did a field trip in Kyrgyzstan, and we built actually a kind of a homemade atlas, ripe atlas probes with a Raspberry Pi and a GPS and so on. And so we wanted to know how, when you move through space and when you connect through a series of Wi-Fi's and networks, how does your route change when you try to reach a target, for example, in France, in USA, etc., in China. And actually, we did some very fascinating discoveries, because when you are here in Osh, in the very south of Kyrgyzstan, in fact, you are in the Fergana Valley. This is the main entrance of the western part of the Silk Road. And one of our hypotheses was that when you're in Osh, actually there is a cable backbone going to China. But for example, none of our metrics actually did go through this Chinese cable that exists. We know it exists, but on every ISP we connected, etc., it was not possible to reach China directly through the Fergana Valley and through this part of the Silk Road. And so we had some very interesting trace routes. For example, when you try to go from Osh to Kashgar, which is not very far away, it's just on the other side of the border in Xinjiang. In fact, your data goes west and makes almost all around the Eurasia, which actually has a very huge geopolitical implications, because it means that Kyrgyzstan is a kind of geopolitical digital bottleneck. There is no connection with the south, so they are dependent to the north, that is to say Russia. And we validated such metrics with local actors, system administrators, ISP administrators, etc. And yes, they confirmed that they totally depend on the Russians. And when we were in Kyrgyzstan, it was in April. And in April, all the ISPs we met were afraid that the Russians could cut them the internet if they don't send troops or weapons to the Russian army in Ukraine. This was their very actual preoccupation. So here it is. I will just stop here, but I have a lot of things more to say, so that I will be happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
So let's move to Paul and have his viewpoint from a computer science perspective.
Thank you, Kavé. It's a great pleasure to be able to join you and the networking channel. I have a few thoughts on my slides today that I'm looking forward to sharing on this topic of strategic and geopolitical implications of networks. I think it's a great topic, so let's dive right in. The perspectives that I'm going to present today are based on my area of research over the past, well, several decades, which is measurement-based study of the internet. And I think it's important to be clear about why we study the internet empirically. I had a conversation, or was part of a conversation with Dave Clark about 2 years ago. And I think he captured the rationale very succinctly, in that empirical study improves understanding of systems that are too large, complex, and dynamic to reason about by simply reading design documents. And that's a theme scale, complexity, and dynamics that I think is important to keep in mind for the rest of my short talk today. And the perspectives that I'll offer, I'm going to try to organize in three categories. One is on connectivity, which relates very directly to some of the things that Kevin was talking about. And it's important to recognize that over the first 25 years of the life of the internet, before the web, most of the efforts in the world of computer science and engineering related to networks really focused on building infrastructure, developing protocols and processes related to things like standards that enabled us to build a worldwide shared infrastructure that we enjoy today. The second theme that I'll talk about is the theme of control. And control really, from my perspective, relates to the fact that in the mid-90s, the internet effectively transitioned from an academic and Defense Department related infrastructure building project to an infrastructure that suddenly became very important to regular people. And the web is largely responsible for that. And since then, since the mid-90s, of course, what's happened is that the internet and the applications that run on the internet have really become central to many, or some might argue most aspects of day-to-day lives for people. And the last theme is the theme of consequences. When we have an infrastructure that has this kind of scope and importance to people, there are many consequences. Again, Kevin highlighted some of them. These are significant from the perspective of strategic issues, national sovereignty, and there are obviously significant geopolitical implications. And I'll conclude my talk with just a couple of brief thoughts, not meant to be comprehensive at all, about what we can do to address strategic and geopolitical risks. So one of the areas that I've focused my research on over the years is on connectivity and understanding some of the details that Kevin talked about in his talk. His was focused very much in the area of Ukraine and Central Asia. Mine has tried to focus more broadly, and it's important to sort of understand how we went through this transition from a time in 1969 with the original 4-node internet to what we have today, where really for the first decade or even 2 decades of the internet, there were hand drawings like the one that you see on the left side of this slide that captured physical connectivity in the internet. And somewhere along the way, because of the interest in people in having access to this infrastructure, we lost the ability to actually map and track where physical infrastructure was deployed. And 2 of the projects that I've spent a lot of time on over the past decade have been focused on putting together maps of physical infrastructure based on collection of publicly available information that service providers make available about their infrastructure. So one of the projects that we published several years ago, called Internet Atlas, focused specifically on long-haul infrastructure in the US. And a more recent project that we have a paper coming up in the ACM IMC conference in a couple of months is called IGDB. This is going to be an openly available repository that has both representation of physical infrastructure worldwide of the internet, as well as routing-based information. And what we've done in this study is to actually fuse the 2 together using geographical anchors. So that database is going to be available to the community. You'll be able to access it and hopefully make good use of the data that's there. So the second issue that is a perspective that I think is important is the issue of control, or the perspective of control. And it just recognizes that the internet is everywhere today, except for perhaps in the Central Asian regions that Kevin pointed out. So communication systems, it's important to recognize have consolidated worldwide onto the internet. And the consequence of this is the internet is absolutely critical infrastructure everywhere. So that's something that needs to be considered and of course is considered. Connectivity it has become pervasive. There are a wide range of connected devices. It's kind of stunning when you walk through various people's households or businesses to see how many different devices are now internet connected, and there are consequences to that. Recognizing what can happen in terms of positive consequences in 2016, the UN declared that internet access is a human right. And this really, I think, just emphasizes how central the internet is to our society today. Another aspect of a related aspect is that it's not just the internet. It's actually software that is the central aspect. And there was a great essay that was written by Mark Andreessen, published in the Wall Street Journal in 2011, on why software is eating the world. If you haven't read this, it's definitely worth a read. And it's very prescient just in terms of recognizing how traditional industries will soon be subsumed by software. And you can look at this over and over and over again, right? So it's not just software, it's software plus connectivity that the internet provides. But the point is that most aspects, even now, 11 years after that Andreessen article, are indeed dependent on software and the internet. And a direct consequence of this, and something that's emerged in the last, let's say, 10 years, is the dawn of social engineering, the recognition by various entities or actors that indeed the populace can be manipulated now and in very direct ways by the software / communication capabilities that are available worldwide. So there are, of course, consequences to this, and I've been implying consequences because if you can control the software and the communication infrastructure, then there are a lot of things that can be done. So it's important to point out that there are many positive consequences with the capabilities that we have today: information availability, access to resources, the tech economy, and so forth. But not all of the transformations have been positive. And indeed, there is now corporate control of information. As Kevin said, how do you get truth? It stuns me when I do search and I just immediately click on top links and say, well, it must be true because it was in the first page of the search results. I'm a very skeptical person, but nevertheless, I give into this because it's efficient to do so. And I've listed a bunch of different negative consequences: the digital divide, the polarization of society, the possibility for censorship, job loss, the end of traditional industries as they transform into the new. And really, it's this last bullet that I think is important to highlight with respect to the topic for today, which is recognizing geopolitical risks. And I just list three. This is not meant to be an exhaustive list. How do we protect internet infrastructure? I thought it was interesting that Kevin in his talk had the cartoon of trying to unplug Russia from the internet. I was asked about that 5 or 6 years ago by a publication, and this is just a very weird thing to think about because, of course, if you unplug yourself, then you don't make all of the wonderful things you have in the internet available to you, and you like those things. So unplugging really doesn't make that much sense. Of course, if you want to control a region in the way that Kevin talked about with Ukraine, that might be possible. But unplugging yourself, I don't know if that's ever going to be possible. What I think is more probable is implementing something like the Chinese firewall, as opposed to some kind of true disconnection and autonomous operation. That just has never made sense to me. Of course, how do we protect political processes? Lots of news about that in terms of what happened in the US in 2016. This is an ongoing problem. And generally, how do we enable global security and prosperity in this technical time? And I think that's a topic that we have to think about very carefully. So my final slide today are just two thoughts on addressing this issue. And what I would posit is that the risk that we're facing as an internet-connected society imply or suggest or require collaborative study between network scientists and social and political scientists. And I was very pleased a couple of years ago to work directly with a political scientist on a project that we had published in SIG-KDD. This looked at indeed what happened with the 2016 election in the US and how political sentiment can be tracked online, and that was a wonderful study, and I look forward to further collaborations with political scientists. The last thing that I'll leave this group with is, what can we do about this as technologists? And I'm not sure that there are many things that we can do other than be clear about the infrastructure and how it operates and how it can be used. But I also think that risks imply the need for a technological workforce that's aware of ethical implications of their efforts. And there have been many CS programs over the last 5 years that have started classes on ethics. I invented a class on ethics in computer science that I'm now teaching at University of Wisconsin. And my idea for this was to try to equip students with a framework for thinking and reasoning about how what they do can have an impact on others. I'm hoping that all schools will eventually teach such a course. It's been very enjoyable for me, and it's a step in a direction that I think is important. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. I remind also the participant that they can ask questions into the chat window, and we have already begun to answer some of the questions. So let me go very fast on what I wanted to say for my presentation. First of all, something that we should take into account is that, the history of all the networks that we had in history, and network is not only internet indeed. You have a lot of networks that have impact on the history of world. And for example, one network that was transporting data the same way that internet is transporting data and had a huge impact on the history of humanity is indeed the network of human migration that was transporting DNA data using very specific protocol for transferring the data that are far from the TCP. But anyway, it is the history of network has shown that network has always come with risk and opportunity. And it's quite interesting to figure out that the first cyber attack goes back to the Civil War in US, where the South troop decided to cut the telegraph poles that were used by the Northern troops to coordinate. And what is quite interesting is that the second cyber attack that we have in history happened in Russia 6 months after, where the Tatar troops that were fighting with the Tsar troop did exactly the same thing to the cable that were connecting Moscow to Irkutsk in Siberia. So we say that cyber issues spread very fast because of the network. Therefore, the network is a risk, but there is also a lot of opportunity. And it posed the following question: what should be the strategy of the actors? Let's position yourself as a country leader or as a big company's board, and that want to decide how they should have a strategic thinking in this context. How we can define cyber strategy by paraphrasing the strategy definition, which is the art of positioning, commanding, directing, and maneuvering your force in space in order to attain your objectives. And therefore, cyber strategy will become the art of positioning, commanding, directing, and maneuvering your cyber force in cyberspace in order to attain your cyber objective. And indeed, the very important question that we have there is, what is the space of cyberspace? And I have to say that the presentation of Kevin positioned very well this concept of geopolitics is about controlling territory. What is the territory of the cyberspace? And indeed, a large part of the work that have been done in this space is in fact about representing, mapping this territory. And this is what I'm going to discuss just after. The second question that exists there is that how you define cyber objectives. And what is the constraint space that you have in defining your cyber objectives? What are cyber force? And indeed, the question of positioning, commanding, directing, coordinating in cyberspace is also a fundamental question that we have to ask if we want to look at the strategic implication of networking. And there is a fundamental issue. Do internet provide anything new into the cyber issues or the strategic issues, or we are still in the same area that we used to be, and internet is just a new dimension, like air become a new dimension in the beginning of 19th century, in the beginning of 20th century. If we want to ask ourselves the question of how we can represent the cyberspace, there is 3 dimensions that we can represent the cyberspace. One dimension is that all in all, cyberspace is embedded into geography. So by just showing on a map the position of internet infrastructure, it enables you to have a lot of insight about the geopolitical issues and the interaction between these. The second element is that nowadays, we are more and more transferring the real world into the internet and into the cyberspace. Nowadays, if you want to see to figure out how to dress in the morning to get out, you are not going anymore to look at your window and look at the sky. You are going on the projection of the sky over the internet, which is the weather application. So more and more geography is also embedded into cyberspace, meaning that by looking at cyberspace, you have a lot of information about what is happening on the ground and in the reality. And indeed, cyberspace is a space on its own, so it can be represented and mapped. I'm just going to show you one interesting map that Kevin knows very well. This is a map that I like very much. He has been making it, and this is so beautiful that I use it in all my presentation. That is called From Gulag to Data Centers. And here we are showing the big projects that have been existing during the past years of building data centers in Siberia. And we are also showing the map of the cable, the internet cable that exists there, that are indeed following the Trans-Siberian pass. And the blue point that you see there are the data centers, and you have what is hashed there is the position of former Gulag camp. And you can see that all new investments in data centers are exactly corresponding to old Gulag camp. I'm not saying that the worker in the data center are the Gulag people, but indeed, because the oligarchs have inherited from the Gulag camp, they are investing in the places that belong to them. So by just showing the position of different infrastructure, we can have a view about some interesting geographical and geopolitical analysis. Just to let you to have another one, I show you the end of this, of the cable that is at Nakoda on the extreme right of the map. And you can see that this cable, how close it is from North Korea. And the first time that we see over the full BGP map, the whole cable enlightened was when Russia gave connectivity to North Korea in 2018 when US banned North Korea for connectivity. So just by mapping infrastructure on a map, you can have very beautiful insight about what it is. Kevin already showed a very nice map about the cyberspace as its own and the BGP representation. So we have been working in having a 5-minute granularity. Each 5 minutes we get one AS map of the internet. We have a BGP observatory that give us each 5 minutes the AS map, the AS graph update, something like 90,000 node and 500,000 links. And we have developed, in collaboration with Kevin and with other people, some visualization mechanism that enable us to see issues. And Kevin showed very nice one of them. I'm not going to go more than that. I will add as my last comment that what we are presenting you here today is a highly multidisciplinary research area. We have to make sitting together geopoliticians and network scientists and computer scientists. It is incredibly tough. It is incredibly tough to make student working in this kind of area, because a student cannot do multidisciplinary research because it's risky for him. When you want to recruit an assistant professor, it should be in computer science or in geopolitics, not in both. Indeed, at my age, it's a luxury that I have to be able to do multidisciplinary research. And moreover, it's incredibly difficult to publish. Because when you do multidisciplinary research, indeed, you're not going to do networking research precisely. You will not be able to have all the precision and all the elements that you have in networking papers. And at the same time, you are not going to be able to speak something that is completely understandable for the geographer. Begin to talk about BGP for a geographer that had no course in networking. And you will see that it's not easy. So it's incredibly difficult. And this is what makes the topic interesting. So I'm finishing my presentation. I would like to give the voice to the audience, and maybe during the question, we will have also the discussion between the different panelists. Thank you very much. Anybody have any question? Or I can read the question. So, as Ukraine infrastructure is damaged, replaced, and brought back online, have you noticed any change to peering strategy for those affected network? I will let Kevin to answer, but let me also give an answer on my side, because I have been also working on looking at Ukraine infrastructure. From February this year, I decided that I am not going to publish results that I'm seeing about Ukraine. Because from one time, I'm not anymore in my researcher position. I will become an operational person. So publishing outcome of observation nowadays on Ukraine is in fact being, indeed, it's the work of journalists, but it's not anymore the work of researcher. We have to wait for the war to calm down, to not be anymore a military operational. And this is something that, for me, it has been very important to do. Now I can let also Kevin to answer to this question, but this is my opinion.
Yeah, I actually completely agree with you, Kavé. In fact, it is an important ethical question when you are a researcher working on war zones, and especially in the post-Soviet, as we say, space. I also wait for confirmations about things we witnessed, we saw, but it's not our job to disclose it. We don't know if it will affect some operations, etc. But as far as I know, and as far as I saw things, yes, there were some disconnections, but what I have to say here is the extraordinary resilience and I would say cooperation between Ukrainian operators. I mean, what they did in the first stages of the war, when the Russians tried to disconnect some parts of the country, to hit some data centers and etc., was quite astonishing. I mean, they reconnected autonomous systems. They did a wonderful work, and you know that in some places we do not manage to quantify it for the moment, but for some places, Starlink actually did play a role in places where physical backbones, well, optical backbones were not working anymore. Yeah.
So I know that there will be a paper on this topic that will be presented at IMC this year in Nice. I have not yet seen the paper, but I will be interested to see. Doesn't mean that we don't have information. We have a lot, because as I say, I have a 5-minute time scale update each 5 minutes of what is ongoing in Ukraine at the BGP level. So I can easily see the change that are happening in this 5-minute time scale. But as I say, we will wait, hopefully, for the end of this war soon and publish it just after. There is another question about the question of Thierry Dutoit that is asking, is it more likely that we will have more connectivity and greater access to information, or we will have more border between countries regarding access to information? I will begin to answer to this question, and I will let Paul and Kevin also to have their view. You know, I had been very frequently going to China in the past 10 years. I was a distinguished visiting professor at the Chinese Academy of Science. I began to go there in 2011 and being almost 2 months per year in China. And when I was going there, I was hoping that the Chinese internet is going to be more and more open, and it will be more and more like internet in other places of the world, or in some other places of the world. I have to say that, unfortunately, in the past 10 years, what I have witnessed is not an opening of network in countries that were using censorship or using the control. But what I'm seeing is a Chinization of the political discourse in Europe and in US. The same argument that I was hearing 10 years ago in China, now I am hearing them in France, in Germany, in Europe, and in US. So meaning that I am quite maybe pessimistic, but countries are coming to seize their control over this network. And it is called sometimes digital sovereignty, sometimes other names, security, sometimes economic sovereignty, and so on and so forth. But at the end of the day, it goes into having more border. And this is my observation. So Kevin and Paul, if you have any comment?
Yes, well, Paul, maybe you want to answer first.
I'll answer quickly. I think that it depends on your point of view. I think people love content and love access to information, and that it's ultimately very hard to prevent people from getting information as they learn more and more about the technical aspects of networks. So while I don't quibble with Kavé's perspective that governments may want to create stronger cyber borders, I think that this is ultimately a very hard thing to do. Just think about the challenges that we have in cybersecurity for keeping malicious actors at bay. Basically, they've won. We can't do it. So to think that somehow that we can keep the general populace from getting access to information, to me, is the equivalent of saying, well, we can secure all our networks from malicious actors. I just don't think it can be done, practically speaking.
Yeah, well, from the point of view of geopolitician, I don't like the word, but let's use it. As I told you in my presentation, geopolitics is about studying the networks that shape territorial power. I mean, territorial power is a matter of networks, and Kavé told it. To my experience, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't know any example of networks, physical or non-physical, that escape from political control. Maybe it is my very, I would say, French Foucauldian pessimistic vision of things, but I don't see how the internet could continue to be this ideal that a community has been building in the last 50 years. It doesn't mean that it will disappear. And we have to fight for it, and we have to fight for digital freedom, etc. But the pressure of authoritarian and, as Kavé said, non-authoritarian states for controlling these infrastructures, I mean, in the physical sense of it, but also the non-physical sense of it, is tremendous. And even in France today, you have some laws that are implemented to regulate, for example, speeches online. Is it something that can be implemented in a democracy? I don't know, but it is a very profound question, a deep question. And unfortunately, I think that internet won't escape the fate of control of networks being controlled by political actors. But I hope I'm wrong.
So there is a question by Kiwi. It will be the last question that we will have time to discuss about. Is about how can we smoothly integrate hard science and soft science to make paper acceptable in both networking and geopolitical fields? Indeed, this is what we are doing. But take into account that it's exactly the same in cybersecurity. When you combine two systems, you are increasing the surface of attack. When you make a multidisciplinary paper containing hard science and soft science, I will not like to use this term because geopolitics is a hard science on the term that geopolitical implication is war. So it's hard. Anyway, when you write a paper in multidisciplinary area, you are in fact improving the surface of the attack of the reviewer number 2. And our community, unfortunately, sometimes reviewer number 2 have a huge power, which make very difficult. Everything that you will be doing, you will find on multidisciplinary research some gaps that are coming from the fact that, just making two people from two disciplines talking with each other is a huge amount of work. Just think about the amount of work that it needed to me to go through papers and books and understand what is the meaning of geopolitics. And indeed, I am very much a learner in this domain. And also, let's imagine the difficulty of explaining the delicacy of BGP communities to a geographer. So I think that we can wrap up our discussion. There is indeed a lot of discussion. We can continue the discussion offline. I yield back to Serge.
Thank you, Kavé. I just need to show one slide, if you allow me. Kavé, can you just quit the presentation mode?
Yes, indeed.
Thank you.
Stop.
Yeah. Well, just again to thank the panelists. very stimulating session, at least raising awareness about one example of multidisciplinary research that has a huge impact on society and the difficulty to develop the research. Where does the research happen and how can you make it through the most attractive venues? So this being said, I would like to thank you and the audience. Again, the panel, the program will be available on the YouTube channel, and the presentation will be made available on the website as well. And we would like to call for your participation. In 2 weeks from now, exactly at the same time, we are going to address a quite different topic, although it might be related, as we are discussing now the design of SIG-G. Questions arose about what kind of tools can we equip the community with in order to support the design. So we'll have a program which is going to be dedicated to future G, so at least SIG-G research platform capabilities, leveraging public-private partnership testbeds, and this is scheduled in 2 weeks from now. So we, of course, would like to call your participation. And again, I would like to say before we close that as a community channel, we welcome any proposal from yourself. If you have ideas about topics that actually you would like to bring to the community, as you see, it's pretty easy to organize. So just drop us a note and we'll be happy to consider. Thanks a lot to you all. Take good care of you, and we'll see you again in 2 weeks from now. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.